My name is Grace, and this year, I turned 75. On the morning of my birthday, I sat in front of the mirror in my small bedroom. The woman staring back at me didn't feel like me. Her hair was snow white. Her face mapped with deep lines, her hands spotted and thin. I blinked at her, half expecting the younger me, the girl who used to dance barefoot in summer rain, to suddenly appear. But she never did. I whispered to myself, when did I become old? Behind me, the walls were covered with framed photographs. My husband, my children, my grandchildren, their smiling faces, frozen in time, seemed to laugh at me gently, reminding me of the life I once had. You see, when I was young, life was not easy. We didn't have much money, and every dollar we earned had to be stretched until it nearly tore apart. But my husband, Robert, and I worked side by side. We raised our 3 children, Michael, John, and Sophie, with more love than money. And that, I always believed, was enough. I can still hear the noise of those days. The sound of children running down the narrow hallway, Robert's laughter as he returned home tired from work, the smell of food cooking in our little kitchen. Life was simple, sometimes hard, but it was warm. When my children grew older, I felt such pride. Michael became a businessman. John found a steady office job. Sophie, my youngest, became a teacher, pouring her heart into shaping young minds. I would sit quietly sometimes, just watching them talk, and my heart would swell. And then came the grandchildren. Ah, those were the sweetest years. Holidays were noisy and joyful. The house filled again with tiny feet, sticky fingers. Toys scattered everywhere, and the sound of little voices calling Grandma. I thought those moments would last forever. But nothing lasts forever. 2 years ago, Robert, my partner of 50 years, passed away suddenly. One morning he was with me, sipping coffee and teasing me about how I always burned the toast. The next, he was gone. Just like that. When he died, it was as if the air in the house was sucked out. The silence was unbearable. The bed felt too big. The house, too empty. I tried to be strong for my children, but when they left after the funeral, I sat alone in that quiet house and realized my world would never be the same. At first, my children visited often. They called. They checked in. But as time passed, their lives pulled them away. Work, children, responsibilities. I understood, but it didn't stop the loneliness from crawling into my bones. So on my 75th birthday, I sat alone in front of the mirror. No phone calls yet. No visitors. Just the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then suddenly, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there stood Michael, my eldest son. He was holding a bouquet of flowers, his smile warm but his eyes serious. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said softly. "Can I come in? I want to talk." We sat down at the kitchen table. He set the flowers down and folded his hands. I could see he was nervous. "Mom," he began, "I've been thinking about you. You've been alone since Dad passed, and I worry about you. I think it's time you considered moving into a senior living community." I froze. His words felt like a knife. "A senior home?" I said, my voice sharp. "You want to send me away?" Michael quickly shook his head. "No, Mom, not like that. This isn't a nursing home. It's a beautiful place, more like a luxury community. You'd have your own apartment, activities, gardens, everything you could want. You wouldn't be alone anymore." I stared at him, torn between hurt and curiosity. "I don't need to be put somewhere," I muttered. "You wouldn't be put anywhere," he insisted gently. "You'd be living, Mom. Really living. Please just come and see it. If you don't like it, we'll forget the whole idea. But at least look." I searched his face. He wasn't trying to get rid of me. He was worried. He wanted me safe. Slowly, I nodded. "All right, I'll take a look." The next day, Michael drove me there. From the outside, it looked like a grand hotel. Manicured gardens stretched wide, flowers blooming in neat rows. Fountains sparkling in the sunlight. The building itself gleamed with polished stone and wide glass windows. Inside, the lobby was bright, decorated with fresh flowers and soft music playing in the background. The staff greeted us with warm smiles. It didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled like fresh coffee and clean laundry. We toured the grounds. My eyes widened as I saw everything: a gym, a library, a small theater, a beauty salon, even a little boutique. There were art rooms, music rooms, and sunny courtyards with benches. "Look at this, Mom," Michael said, handing me a brochure. Yoga, art classes, book clubs, gardening. They even have a choir. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't in years: excitement. Still, doubt tugged at me. This must be expensive. Michael smiled. "Don't worry about that. We'll manage. I just want you to be happy." As we walked down one of the hallways, a woman about my age approached us with a friendly smile. "Are you visiting?" she asked. "I'm Susan Miller. I moved in 2 months ago. Honestly, I was nervous at first, but this place has been wonderful. I've made friends, and my days are full again." Her eyes shone with sincerity, and in that moment, I felt my resistance soften. Maybe this could be a new start. When moving day finally came, my children and grandchildren arrived to help. My heart felt heavy as I packed the last of my belongings into boxes. Every object seemed to whisper memories of Robert, of my children. When they were small, of the life we had built together in that house. As we loaded the car, I looked back at the little home one last time. It had sheltered me for over 50 years. I whispered goodbye under my breath. At the community, the staff welcomed me warmly. My room was bright and airy, with large windows overlooking a courtyard. A fresh bedspread, polished furniture. Even a vase of flowers waiting on the table. "See, Mom?" Michael said, patting my shoulder. "It's nice, isn't it?" I forced a smile. "Yes, it is." The children ran around the room, laughing. "Grandma, we'll visit you all the time," they shouted. That night, as I unpacked, I stood by the window. The view was unfamiliar, the walls strange. But I told myself this was a new beginning. The next morning, I joined the others for breakfast in the dining hall. Susan spotted me immediately and waved. "Grace, over here," she called. I sat with her and a few others who welcomed me kindly. They introduced themselves: Helen, a retired nurse; Margaret, who loved to paint; and George, who once played the violin in an orchestra. Soon I was part of their circle. We shared stories, laughter, and cups of coffee. For the first 3 months, life was almost sweet. I joined yoga classes, though my joints complained. I learned to paint in the art workshop. Susan and I tried gardening together, our hands in the soil. Our laughter filling the air. I thought, maybe Michael was right. Maybe this is exactly what I needed. Then things began to change. The meals shrank, the flavors dulled. Exercise classes were cancelled. The art room was locked without explanation. Staff who once smiled now passed briskly with clipped nods. I noticed it most at night. The halls grew quiet, too quiet, and the call buttons often went unanswered. I heard moans from distant rooms. But when I asked, the nurses said, "Everyone's fine. Don't worry yourself." But I did worry. The first real shock was Mrs. Turner, a sharp old woman who had joined me at breakfast every day. One morning she wasn't there. Resting, staff said. By afternoon, her room was stripped bare. No explanation, no goodbye. That night Susan whispered, "Do you think she died?" "Maybe," I said. "But wouldn't they tell us?" Susan's eyes were hard. "Not if they don't want questions." From then on, I noticed disappearances. A walker left in the hallway. A cardigan folded on a chair. People just gone. One evening, Mr. Patel clutched his chest, gasping for air. We pressed his emergency button and shouted for help. No one came. After 10 minutes, Susan ran to the front desk. They called an ambulance at last, but by then his face was gray. Later, we heard he had died in the hospital. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. What if it had been me? Would I have been left waiting, too? It was not just neglect. It was indifference. Then, one night, walking past the office, I overheard 2 staff members laughing. "It's been 3 months," one said. "We can cut back now. They've already paid." My heart stopped. We weren't people to them. We were prophets. Margaret was next. She slipped in the bathroom and pressed the emergency button. No one came. For nearly an hour she lay there, moaning, until Susan and I found her and screamed for help. When staff finally arrived, they wheeled her away. She never came back. Her paintings still hung in the art room. Bright bursts of color against dull beige walls. Silent reminders of her absence. Helen, the nurse, confided in whispers they're cutting corners. "I've seen the wrong pills given out. Half doses. Missing doses. It's dangerous." George put his violin away. "What's the point?" he muttered. "They don't care if we live or die." The heating failed in our wing during a bitter winter night. We huddled under blankets, teeth chattering. Frost rimmed the windows. By morning, several residents were ill. And yet, that afternoon, when families visited, the fires were lit in the lobby, cookies baked, staff smiling. It was all a show. I realized we weren't meant to complain. We were meant to endure. My children visited less and less. At first weekly, then monthly, then only on birthdays or holidays. On my granddaughter's birthday, I asked to leave. The staff told me it wasn't allowed without special approval. That night I held her photograph and cried. Susan found me. She sat beside me, gripping my hand. "Grace," she whispered, "we can't live like this anymore. We're not prisoners. We still have choices. We're still alive." Her words struck deep. From then on, we began to notice more. Residents who complained were disciplined moved to the far wing, where cries echoed at night. One man, Thomas, protested loudly about the food. The next day, he was gone. The staff said his family had transferred him. But I had spoken with his daughter just 2 days earlier. She had no such plans. We began keeping notes, small scraps hidden in books. Times when call buttons went unanswered. Who disappeared, and when. Which programs were cut. Susan kept a list of the nurses who ignored us. I jotted down overheard conversations. One night, Helen whispered that she wanted to help. "If I can gather enough proof, maybe my son will believe me." But before she could, she collapsed. "A stroke," they said. She was sent away. We never saw her again. Then it was my turn. I had written a letter to my daughter, describing the neglect. I sealed it, addressed it, and left it at the desk for mailing. 2 days later, the letter was returned to me, unopened. Across the envelope was stamped unauthorized. That night, a nurse entered my room unannounced. She stood at the door, her smile cold. "Grace, dear, you don't want to upset your family with silly stories. Best keep things simple. Enjoy your stay." Her meaning was clear: be quiet. I didn't sleep at all that night. The final straw came one stormy evening. Lightning split the sky, and the power flickered out. The halls were dark, the air heavy with fear. In the blackout, we heard a cry: "George." He had fallen. We shouted for help, but the intercom was dead. Susan and I tried to lift him, but he was too heavy. When power returned an hour later, staff finally came. By then George's leg was badly fractured. They took him away. He never returned. Susan and I looked at each other. We didn't need to speak. We both knew if we stayed, we'd be next. We planned in whispers, late at night. We memorized the shifts. We packed light bags, a sweater, photographs, a little money hidden in my Bible. But the fear was constant. Once, a nurse entered while we were talking. We snapped our mouths shut, smiling innocently. My heart thudded in my chest. Another time, we almost tried to leave. But the front doors were locked, a guard by the desk. We retreated, trembling. Still, we waited. And waited. At last, before dawn on a cold morning, we crept through the halls. My heart pounded. At the entrance, a staff member stepped from the shadows. "Where are you going?" he asked, his tone more curious than commanding. Susan stood straighter. "We're leaving," she declared, her voice firm. "This isn't a prison." The guard looked uncertain, then shrugged. "Suit yourselves." And with that, the glass doors hissed open. The air outside rushed against my face, cold, sharp, and alive. For the first time in years, I felt the sting of freedom. We stepped into the dark morning. Two elderly women with worn suitcases and shaking knees, but our heads held high. We hadn't thought about what came next. The first week, we lived in a motel that smelled faintly of cigarettes. No matter how wide we opened the windows, the wallpaper peeled, the TV barely worked, and the bathroom faucet dripped all night. "Luxury accommodations," Susan said wryly one morning, tossing her thin motel towel onto the bed. "We've upgraded." We laughed until tears ran down our cheeks. Though beneath the laughter was fear. Finding a new place was harder than either of us had expected. Landlords looked at our wrinkled faces and gray hair and saw nothing but risk. "You ladies might need care soon," one said bluntly. "I can't take that on." Susan bristled. "We're not asking you to take care of us, only to take our rent." But doors closed again and again. To make things worse, neither of us was exactly tech-savvy. Searching apartment listings online felt like navigating a foreign country. Susan once accidentally clicked a button that filled the screen with flashing ads for weight loss pills. "Good Lord," she muttered. "The computer thinks I'm fat." At the public library, a teenager with purple hair leaned over our shoulders. "You ladies need help?" "Yes," Susan said, "unless you plan on charging consulting fees." The teen smirked. "Don't worry, Grandma. First lesson's free." Susan shot back, "Don't, Grandma, me. You'll be old someday too." I thought the poor child would faint from laughter. Still, with her help, we finally learned to search listings properly. Though half the time we ended up somewhere completely unsuitable, too expensive, too far. Or up 3 flights of stairs with no elevator. Through it all, Susan and I bickered like an old married couple. One night she accused me of hogging the motel's one working lamp. Another night I accused her of snoring loud enough to wake the neighbors. "You sound like a train," I told her. "Well," she retorted, "at least trains go places. You just wheeze in circles." We dissolved into giggles like schoolgirls. Laughter echoing in that shabby room until our stomachs hurt. Still, doubt gnawed at me in the quiet hours. What if Michael had been right? What if we'd been foolish to leave? Sometimes, lying awake, I whispered to myself, "Robert, I wish you were here. You'd know what to do." But then Susan would squeeze my hand in the dark. "Don't give up, Grace." We didn't escape just to crawl back. And I would breathe again. We found the bakery apartment by accident. It was Susan's idea to stop for coffee. After another long day of failed apartment tours, the little bakery on the corner was warm and bright, filled with the smell of cinnamon and sugar. Behind the counter stood a stout woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile. "You ladies look tired," she said. "Sit. I'll bring you something fresh." Her name was Mrs. Alvarez. And she didn't just bring coffee. She brought warm bread rolls straight from the oven. When we explained our search for a home, she tilted her head thoughtfully. "Well, I do have an apartment upstairs. Not fancy, but sunny. The rent's low. You'd have to put up with the smell of bread every morning, though." Susan and I looked at each other, wide-eyed. The smell of bread sounded like heaven. That night, we climbed the narrow stairs and stepped into a small but bright apartment. The floors were worn wood, the walls pale yellow. Sunlight poured through the windows, and from below drifted the warm scent of yeast and sugar. "This is it," Susan whispered. We signed the lease the next day. The apartment was nearly bare at first. We slept on borrowed mattresses, ate at a wobbly card table, and used crates as chairs. But slowly, we filled it. We bought second-hand furniture, thrifted curtains, and decorated with potted plants. Susan pinned her late husband's navy cap on the wall. I placed Robert's photo by my bedside. We found a rhythm. Mornings began with the bakery's aroma wafting through the floorboards. Sometimes Mrs. Alvarez knocked with day-old rolls, always refusing our attempts to pay. "Your neighbors now," she said. We joined the local community center. I signed up for painting classes, my hands shaky, but steady enough to splash color onto canvas. Susan joined the choir. Her voice cracked on the high notes, but she sang with such joy that no one cared. We met others there. Harold, a retired actor who told dramatic stories no one quite believed. Maria, who painted landscapes and scolded anyone who used too much blue, and Margaret, a young single mother who brought her toddler to classes, grateful for the company. Slowly, our world widened again. Of course, we had our misadventures. Once, I decided to help in the bakery kitchen. Mrs. Alvarez handed me a tray of croissants. 10 minutes later, I had somehow set off the fire alarm. Smoke billowed, alarms shrieked, and Susan laughed so hard she nearly fell off her chair. "Remind me never to let you cook again," she said between gasps. Another time, we adopted a stray cat that lingered by the bakery's back door. He was scrawny, gray, and mean as sin. We named him Napoleon. He terrorized us by climbing curtains, knocking cups off shelves, and yowling at 3 in the morning. Yet, every night, he curled up between us like he owned the place. Not everything was easy. One autumn evening, as the last leaves scraped along the pavement outside, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Michael stood there. His face was pale, his tie loosened, his eyes dark with a storm. I knew all too well. "Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Why didn't you tell me you left? Do you know how scared I was when I found out?" I braced myself against the edge of the table. "Because you wouldn't have let me." His mouth tightened, his jaw clenching like his father's used to when he was angry. "I thought I was helping. I thought the community would give you safety. But you ran away in the middle of the night. Was I that wrong? Was everything I did for you useless?" Susan, who had been stirring tea at the counter, glanced up but wisely kept quiet. Even Napoleon froze mid-prowl across the windowsill, sensing the tension. I reached out, touched Michael's cheek, the way I had when he was a boy, feverish with measles. "You weren't wrong to care. You just didn't see what I needed. Safety without freedom isn't life." This, I gestured to Susan, to the mismatched chairs, to the cluttered table. "With its chipped mugs, this is life." His eyes shimmered, tears glinting like dew. He opened his mouth, closed it, then whispered, "I just want you to be happy." "I am," I whispered back, with more certainty than I expected. For a moment, silence hung between us, heavy and tender. Then Susan, breaking the spell in her usual fashion, clattered down 2 cups of tea in front of us. "Well, if we're going to cry, we might as well do it over Earl Grey," she said. Michael let out a reluctant laugh, wiping at his eyes with the back of his sleeve. The laugh cracked something in the room, and just like that, the storm passed. After that night, my children visited differently. Not as caretakers with clipboards hidden behind their smiles. Not as policemen checking if I'd locked the door, but as family. They began to remember I was still their mother, not their patient. Sophie came often, her arms always full of graded papers scrawled with red ink. She'd sit at the table, pulling out the most ridiculous lines her students had written. One of them, she said, tapping a page, compared Macbeth to a YouTube influencer who would do anything for clout. She threw up her hands. I mean, they're not wrong, but still. Susan laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. Grace, she said, wiping her eyes, if you'd had teachers like Sophie, you might have stayed out of trouble. Excuse me, I sniffed, I was a model student. Sophie raised an eyebrow. That's not what Uncle Harold told me about you sneaking out to dances. I nearly choked on my biscuit. Betrayed by my own brother, I muttered. For the first time in a long while, it felt like I was back at my old kitchen table, listening to my children banter while Robert chuckled in the background. John, too, began to change. He called from his office, sometimes in the middle of the day, just to chat. At first, I thought something was wrong. Are you sick? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. No, he chuckled. Can't a son call his mother to argue about baseball? So we did. We argued fiercely about his beloved Yankees, and my stubborn loyalty to the Cubs. He tried to quote statistics I countered with sentiment, and memories of Robert listening to games on the old radio. Neither of us won, but that wasn't the point. He no longer slowed his voice as if speaking to a child. He no longer filled every pause with worried questions. We just talked, and sometimes that was enough. Michael, though still protective, began to understand in his own way. One Saturday, he appeared with a heavy toolbox, muttering about fixing the wobbly shelf in the corner. He spent 10 minutes staring at it, 15 minutes unscrewing things, and then, like men in this family always did, he gave up and sat down. Instead of fixing anything, he and Susan ended up perched on that shelf, legs dangling, arguing about whether cats could be trained. Of course they can, Michael insisted. With patience and food, anything is possible. Susan snorted. Cats don't serve anyone. They're anarchists with fur. Napoleon, who had been lounging nearby, leapt onto the table, locked eyes with Michael, and deliberately shoved a vase onto the floor. It shattered with a loud crash. Well, Susan said smugly, I rest my case. Michael sighed, shoulders sagging. I'll buy you a new vase. Don't bother, I said, sweeping up the pieces. He'll only destroy that one too. Michael laughed, a real laugh this time, and for once. I saw the boy he used to be, sitting on the floor with his Lego blocks, grinning when Robert teased him. Still, doubt lingered. One evening, as I folded laundry in the next room, I overheard Sophie and Michael in the hallway. Their voices were low, but not low enough. Is Mom losing it? Sophie whispered. Running off like that? Leaving the place we worked so hard to find? I froze, a towel clutched to my chest. No, Michael said firmly. She's stronger than we thought. Braver, even. There was a pause. Then Sophie sighed. I just don't want to lose her too soon. The words pierced me. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears stinging my eyes. Stronger. The word filled me with both pride and sorrow. Like a medal pinned to a chest already weary of battles. Another time, John stayed late after a visit. He lingered by the window, watching the bakery lights flicker below. Mom, he said softly, do you ever regret leaving the community? It wasn't perfect, but at least you had security. I shook my head. Security isn't worth much if you feel like a prisoner. I'd rather risk the drafty windows here than the airless safety there. He turned to me, expression unreadable. Then he leaned down, kissed my forehead, and whispered, I'm proud of you. That was the first time any of them had said those words since Robert died. I carried them with me like a talisman. There were lighter moments too. One evening, the three of them came together for dinner. Crammed into my little kitchen. Susan made her famous stew, and the children brought bread and wine. The laughter was loud, the table cluttered with empty plates. "Mom," Sophie said suddenly, raising her glass, "to you. For teaching us that life doesn't end when you get old, it just changes." I blushed, waving her off. "Oh, stop. I'm not a philosopher." "No," Susan said, smiling slyly, "but you're a rebel. And that counts." Michael groaned. "Don't encourage her." We all laughed. For a moment, it felt like Robert was there too, leaning back in his chair, grinning at the chaos of his family. Of course, the doubts didn't vanish overnight. Some nights I lay awake, wondering if my children were right. Maybe I had been reckless. Maybe I had frightened them more than I realized. But every morning, when the bakery smell drifted upward, and Susan poured my tea, I knew I had chosen the right kind of life for me. And when I heard Michael's firm voice in my memory, "She's stronger than we thought," I held on to that. Because strength, I was learning, could bloom even in the late autumn of life. Winter came hard, as it always does in the city. The streets turned icy, buses ran late, and the little apartment became drafty. We stuffed old towels under the windowsills, knitted scarves, while watching snow collect on the fire escape, and drank cocoa thick enough to coat the tongue. But some nights, my bones ached so much I cried silently into my pillow, muffling the sound so Susan wouldn't hear. Getting out of bed felt like lifting stone. My hands shook when I tried to thread a needle or button my coat. I thought often of Robert, of how he would have warmed my feet under the blankets without a word. Then Susan fell ill. At first it was nothing, a cough, a fatigue she brushed aside with a laugh. "It's just the cold, Grace. Don't fuss." But then, one morning, she collapsed in the kitchen, the kettle whistling shrill while she lay motionless on the floor. I panicked. My heart thundered as I fumbled for the phone, my fingers trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. The paramedics came, efficient and brisk, carrying her away while I stumbled after them in slippers. At the hospital, I sat by her bed, clutching her hand with both of mine. "Don't you dare leave me," I whispered, my throat raw. "I can't lose you too. Not after Robert." Her eyes fluttered open, weak but sparkling with her usual fire. "Grace," she rasped, "you're stuck with me. I'm too stubborn to go anywhere." I laughed through tears, though it felt more like choking. She recovered slowly. Each day I brought her soup, fluffed her pillows, straightened the flowers by her bedside. And when she finally returned home, frail but grinning, I hovered so much she snapped, "If you fluff my pillows one more time, I'll smother you with them." The look on my face must have been ridiculous, because she burst out laughing. I joined her, relief spilling out in tears, until we were both doubled over, clutching our sides. Napoleon leapt onto the bed, glaring as though scolding us for disturbing his nap. That only made us laugh harder. Those weeks taught me something. Even in frailty, we were fierce. Even in winter, there was warmth. Spring came late but glorious, spilling color back into our lives. The park down the street burst with tulips and daffodils, their heads nodding in the breeze like old friends saying hello. We joined a gardening project at the community center. Our hands sank into dark soil, planting seeds alongside children and neighbors. I hadn't gardened since Robert was alive. As I pressed each seed into the earth, I remembered his voice, "Be patient, Grace. The best things take time." Watching the flowers sprout felt like watching our own lives take root again. Susan and I also joined Harold's latest venture, a little theater group. Harold, a retired actor, treated our rehearsals as though Broadway agents might be hiding in the janitor's closet. He barked orders, rolled his eyes, and demanded emotional honesty from a cast of mostly arthritic septuagenarians. One night, we performed a short play at the center. I forgot my lines halfway through. and ad-libbed something absurd about losing my dentures in a fruit basket. The audience roared with laughter. Susan laughed so hard she almost toppled off the stage, clutching the curtain for support. Afterward, Harold sighed dramatically. "Well, Grace, it wasn't in the script, but it was genius." Life wasn't perfect. Bills still worried us. Sometimes we counted coins for bus fare. Our bodies still ached, knees groaning, hips stiff. But our days were full. Neighbors began to call us the lively ladies upstairs. The bakery children brought us drawings of cats, flowers, and two old ladies with crooked smiles. Even Napoleon softened, curling at our feet while we sipped tea by the window, his purr like a rusty engine finding its rhythm. One evening, Susan and I stood in the park, watching a group of children fly kites. The sky blazed orange and pink, the kites tugging upward like they were desperate to break free. "Funny," Susan murmured, "how at 75, I feel lighter than I did at 50. I squeezed her hand. "Because we finally let go of the strings." One golden evening, Susan and I sat by the window, our hands entwined, watching the sun sink behind the rooftops. The bakery below had long since closed, and the sweet scent of bread still lingered in the air. "Grace," Susan whispered, her voice almost carried away by the hum of traffic below. "I used to think growing old meant waiting for the end, sitting quietly in some corner, counting the days. But now," she turned to me, her eyes soft, "now I see it's just another chapter. Maybe the best one yet." Tears blurred my vision. I pressed my forehead against hers. "Yes," I said softly. "As long as we're alive, it's never too late." The city lights flickered on, one by one, like stars stitched across the earth. Napoleon leapt onto the sill, curling his tail around our hands. Somewhere downstairs, Mrs. Alvarez's grandchildren laughed as they chased each other out the bakery door. At 75, I thought my story was finished, that I was nothing but a lonely old widow, waiting for the end. But I was wrong. This wasn't the last page. This was a new beginning. And with Susan by my side, I finally believed that my story, messy, funny, painful, beautiful, was still being written, one golden evening at a time. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for sharing this time with me. Stories like this remind us of the love that binds us, the losses that shape us, and the incredible resilience that carries us through. If you enjoyed this journey, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. And I'd love to hear from you. Share your own memories, family stories, or thoughts in the comments below. Who knows, maybe your story could inspire the next video. Until next time, take care, and keep cherishing the chapters of your life.